right. And without further ado, we will hand it over to Dr. Haʻalilio Solomon.
Cool. Mahalo, Anna. Making sure my levels are okay. You can hear me okay? Okay, great. He aloha keia ka apuni nei manaki e ha'o ka honua. Aloha, good morning, good afternoon, good day, good evening, good early wee hours of the morning to some of you folks in the Philippines. Thank you so much for joining us at such an inconvenient hour. I can share my screen now, just so you can get right into it. Feel free to drop in any comments, questions, insights at any point during this. This can be a very participatory session, as I think they usually are with ELP. So without any more delay, this is a session that we're calling Traditional Ecological Knowledge and how we can document it during language documentation, this noble pursuit of ours that we're all learning about. My name is Noah Haʻalilio Solomon. I usually go by Ha'a or Haʻalilio, my middle name. Today is, you'll see in this corner, in Hawaiian we call once the moon rises again, a new lunar cycle has a different name. And today's lunar cycle, tonight's moon name is Hulu in the Hawaiian calendar, and the Hawaiian month's name is Pelehu. In the Western Gregorian calendar, we're, of course, the 7th of November, 2025. Actually, I looked, Anna, last year. It was almost a year ago to the date, to today, that we gave this session last year. So I like how regular it's become. I tweaked this presentation a little bit, but mostly I'll be talking about traditional ecological knowledge from a Hawaiian perspective, because I work mostly in Hawaii and work on revitalizing the language of my ancestors, my kupuna, Hawaiian language. First of all, I have to say, mahalo. Thank you, of course, many thanks, of course, to Annie Baloo and the Endangered Languages Project, the awesome work you folks are doing, the incredibly important work you're doing. And I'm so happy to participate in everything and anything you folks do and invite me to. Ovaya, who am I? I am an educator at the University of Hawaiʻi at Manoa in the Hawaiian language department. So I teach Olala Hawaii, I teach Hawaiian language. I received an MA as well as a PhD in linguistics. And my interests are language revitalization, language shift, language attitudes, and of course, what we're talking about today, TEK, traditional ecological knowledge. This is a picture of me in our university's radio station, our college radio station, where I do a Hawaiian language, Hawaiian music show. I've been doing it since about 2008. So Hawaiian music and music in general, particularly folk music, is also a big interest of mine. And we're talking about the interconnectedness between language and culture, which, as this slide here says, the relationship between the two cannot be overstated, and how important the relationship between language and culture is incredibly important. Usually a certain language, or at least a language variety, identifies specific groups of people. Engaging with another language means engaging with the culture, and vice versa. Engaging with the language, with the culture means hopefully you're engaging with the language as well that's tied to it. So therefore, we cannot expect to understand a culture without understanding its language, and vice versa. We'll get into more of what that means. I'm sure you folks have, you already know this, and you've already discussed it in other sessions, but a reminder to sort of set the tone for us for this session. The The field of linguistics has a kuleana. Kuleana is a Hawaiian word basically meaning responsibility, which is a big concept we'll revisit repeatedly during this session. But I hope you folks agree with me when I say linguistics has a responsibility of kuleana to empower communities. So those communities have the means to determine their own linguistic destiny. I love how this is so succinctly, concisely put by Professor Dr. Andrea Perez-Croper. She's a former linguistics professor at the University of Hawaiʻi at Manoa. She's recently switched to a more administrative role. But I love her quote, and I just want to say that part of empowering communities is through the thorough documentation, which is informed by really closely, astutely paying attention to what matters to the community, beyond just linguistically and culturally, but what is important and worthy of knowing and transmitting to the next generation, and generations, I should say. So for language documentation and conservation, aka LD&C, it's important to understand the interconnectedness of language and culture, recognize the biodiversity that exists among, across, and between cultures, and then, of course, to strive to document and conserve cultural, traditional, ecological knowledge systems. We'll talk extensively about what knowledge systems are today. I'm going to show you several examples of Hawaiian ways of knowing or knowledge systems, or you might call them epistemologies. So before we dive in, what are we talking about when we're talking about culturally relevant knowledge, traditional ecological knowledge? What is TEK? To help us understand, to help us understand what TEK is, I always turn to, in Hawaii, we call them mo'olelo ka'au or mo'olelo oiwi, traditional stories. Stories that have been passed down for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, even hundreds of generations. And the elements or the components that make up the story have survived and endured the test of time. And I think that really shows what really is important in a specific cultural setting. What kinds of elements are still contained and captured and therefore transmitted into the future through these stories. And if we look at what TEK is through the lens of traditional stories, I think that gives us a good idea of knowing what's important in terms of TEK and what we should document. So one traditional story from Hawaii comes through it's called He'eme'iole. In English, that translates to the octopus and the rat. And this is a animated short story. We would probably say it's more of a children's story, but even at the university level, I use it in my classes because it has universal values and morals. It's friendly, all age friendly, family friendly, and like I said earlier, it has components that are really culturally and linguistically valuable and important and worth remembering and worth documenting. So hopefully this link is going to work. Let me stop share real quick and make sure I have sharing audio as well. Let me know if you cannot hear this when it starts to play.
I ka wā kahiko, o noho kekahi iole me kona ohana, ma ka mokupuni o mokoli'i. I ke kahi la, makemake oia e hele aku I kane ohe. Ua loa a iaia he wa'a, a hoia kula oia I kualoa. I kona hiki ana mai, ua ho'opa'a ia ka wa'a ma ke kumuniu, a hele kula ka iole I kane ohe. Aka, a ole I ho'opa'a pono ia ka wa'a. No laila, I kona hiki ana mai kane ohe mai, ua lilo ka wa'a I ke kai. Ka pilikia nui. Ua noho I hola ka iole a ue me ka leo nui loa. Ua lohe ia kona we ana e kekahi he'e loko maika'i. Inau kula ka he'e iaia.
Ei, e a kou pilikia.
A pane mai laka i ole.
Ua nalo wale ko uaa. Ua lilo paha I ke kai. No ka mea, a ole paha mai kai ko uho o paa ana. A ole hiki iau ke hoi aku I mokoli'i. No ka mea, a ole hiki iau ke au au.
Pane mai laka he'e na au palu palu.
A ole pilikia, hiki paha ia'u ke kokua aku ia oe. E pi'i a e oe I luna o ko'u po'o. A e hoi aku au ia oe I kou home.
I ke kau ano ka i ole maluna kona po'o, ua ho'omaka ka he'e e hoi aku I mokoli'i. Ka nui o ko ka i ole maka'u. A ka hea kula ka he'e.
E noho mali e oe, mai makau. Kama aina loa au I ki ia kai.
Ma hope iho, ua hike kula lao I mokoli'i. Ua iho I hola ka i ole, mai luna iho ko ka he'e po'o. A ha'i kula o ia iaia.
Ke mahalo nui aku nei au ia oe no kou lawe ana mai iau. Ai ke kahi makana nao maluna o kou po'o.
A hola awivia kula ka i ole I uka. Ua haha e la ka he'e maluna kona po'o. A loa'a ke kukai. Ua ki'o ka i ole maluna ke po'o no ka mea maka'u loa o ia. Ka huhu nui o ka he'e. Mai kēlā manawa mai, inā ike ia ka leho e ka he'e. Ua lalau o ia iaia no ka mea mana'o o ia o ka i ole no ia. Hana ka po'e Pakipika I kekahi mea I kapa ia he lū he'e. Me ka pōhaku a me ka leho. A loa'a ka he'e ia lako me keia mea.
Pipi holo ka ao.
Oh yeah. So that's the mo'olelo. Obviously, it was all in Olelo Hawaiʻi, Hawaiian. Hopefully, the visuals helped you understand certain parts of it. If we have time later, we can really talk about the sort of deeper meaning about this mo'olelo oiwi, this traditional story.
I ka
But
waka
what this
hiko,
is showing,
I ka waka hiko,
trying to move on. Let me go back to what this mo'olelo is showing us is what is important to Hawaiians historically and still to today, linguistically and culturally, and therefore it should be documented. Because what we saw in this mo'olelo was lots of ecology, lots of biology, technology, geography, all kinds of important knowledge systems that are encoded, and especially when we remember that this is a kind of story that would probably be taught to probably be told to children, and becomes therefore more important to as an educational tool. So what I like to say that this mo'olelo captures is the essence of a language, the worldview of a language. And all of those knowledge systems I was talking about, ecology, biology, technology, etc., together they form what a language, what we call as a language's worldview. And worldviews are amazingly unique, and the diversity of worldviews across languages and cultures is incredible and impressive and beautiful and all of those things. And so a language's worldview is, in my opinion, is at the core of language documentation and conservation. And that's really what, when we document languages, we're not just documenting words or phrases or grammatical patterns, but we are trying to get at the documentation of that very unique worldview that a language encodes, that a language has for its culture. Alongside a language's worldview, or I should say a part of a language's worldview, is and equally important in language documentation is examples of really highly developed, very precise, very sophisticated development of language. What I mean by that, of course, are all of these examples of traditional ecological knowledge that we'll talk about today, but also kinship terms. This is an infographic that my students did to illustrate how terms for siblings in Hawaiian are more specific and more highly developed than sibling terms in English. If you think about when you say my sister or my brother, the relationship between yourself and your sibling is not necessarily indicating what word you should choose the way it is in Hawaiian. So in Hawaiian, if I'm talking about my sister, I have to think about, is it my older sister, my younger sister? Is it my older brother or my younger brother? Am I a male or female? Because that's going to determine which word I use. We have a different word for sister of a female versus sister of a male. And we don't necessarily have to think about that in English because we just use sister and brother, younger and older. In Hawaiian, it's more complex than English, and other languages are even more complex than the Hawaiian system. So those kinship terms are an example of very precise, highly developed language that are very important during language documentation. Other examples of highly developed language would be indexical knowledge and taxonomies. I have examples of that as well. Classifier systems, endemic flora and fauna, technology, all of these different ways of knowing different alternative literacies and epistemologies. Other examples of these would be, Hawaiian has a possessive classifier system, meaning you're going to choose a different word for my, for example. Like in English, when you say my mother and my child, you use the same word my. But in Hawaiian, the relationship between myself and my mother is different than the relationship between myself and my child. And therefore, it's Hawaiian classifies those possessions differently based on that relationship. And we use different words for my. Something that English speakers, we don't have to do in English. Another example of highly developed language are different parts of a 24-hour period. In Hawaii, we have all of these words for, they roughly correspond sort of on a one-to-one translation basis with their English counterparts, but not quite. And these two infographics show the different Hawaiian words for different times of day and the Hawaiian words for different times of night. And we have a very developed set of words to describe the different moments during a 24-hour period. So these are examples of different ways of knowing that are very important in language documentation. I'm just going to check the chat really quick. Thank you, Anna, for the summary of the story. William's noticing that different languages have a lot more precision in identifying kinship. Very true. Mahalo all for your feedback. So I think what I hope is valuable for you folks is learning from a Hawaiian perspective what 3 examples of different ways of knowing would be. What I want if someone is documenting Hawaiian language, going beyond just documenting the words as we've been saying, but also what the cultural symbolisms of these. We're going to talk about a tree, a flower, and a bird today. And all of these species are native to Hawaii. And for a long time, they were just documented from a Western perspective based on Western values, meaning they were given a Latin name in the binomial nomenclature, and they were sort of described ecologically, which is important. But when botanists and scientists and taxonomists were describing these things, they often missed and still do miss the importance of all three of these species in a cultural linguistic sense from a Hawaiian perspective, in a Hawaiian worldview. So I will share 3 examples from Hawaii and their ecological importance, their value in material culture, their value in folklore and the mythscape, and of course their linguistic value. So if you've been to Hawaii, you've probably seen this Ohi'alehua tree. This is such an important and iconic symbol of Hawaii because of how abundantly it grows and how ecologically important it is. Again, it has a Latin name, Metrosideros macropis, maybe is how you pronounce it, I'm not sure. In Hawaiian, it's Ohi'alehua. In the word ohia itself, we have this root called ohi. Ohi in Hawaiian means to gather. And Ohi'alehua are important in the aina, in the land, in the landscape, because of how much water they gather and hold for their own sustenance and also for the sustenance of neighboring species. Interestingly, every couple of years or decades, Hawaii Island has lava flows and the Kilauea volcano erupts. And when that happens, it renews the land. And the Ohi'alehua is the first tree to grow out naturally from a lava flow, from a new lava flow. The Ohi'alehua also corresponds to a variety of kalo. If we have time at the end, the entire Hawaiian universe is organized in epistemological pairs, and the Ohi'alehua has its own pair with a different species of plant, which is edible, known as kalo in Hawaiian. Other folks call it taro or taro. Materially, in material culture, the Ohi'alehua is valuable as one of the best hardwoods to make paddles, to make surfboards, to make other tools. Its beautiful leaves and blossoms and foliage are used in all kinds of adornments for hulas. We call them lei or vehi, and they make beautiful. I wish I had a picture of a head lei with lehua blossoms, but it makes beautiful adornments. And it's also extremely significant in the art of Hawaiian dance, which is called hula. And there we see Ohi'alehua tree in full bloom in this forest veil. I believe this is on Hawaii Island, aka Big Island. The Ohi'alehua tree is also, I kind of was thinking about this last night in Western literature or folklore. We might have a giving tree with that sort of symbolism. I think Hawaii would, if we had to have an equivalent, it would be our Ohi'alehua. It's a focal point and a motif in dozens of stories, mo'olelo, as I mentioned earlier, maybe even hundreds. And it also has different symbolisms, such as love. It's symbolic of female energy. And also it is the setting for lots of innuendo. Linguistically speaking, lehua is important because lehua by itself also means an expert, someone who is swift and strong on the battlefield, and therefore would be called an expert because of how agile they are. A warrior. Also, it signifies someone who is the first to wage battle, the first to actually start it. More tenderly, it means sweetheart, or a beloved friend or relative, as well as other poetic references. So it has a lot of meaning. It's a word packed full of meaning, and all kinds of languages. Most languages have words that have this type of polysemy, meaning all of these words these words that have lots and lots of meanings. And we want to make sure we're documenting all of those meanings during language documentation. So that's the Ohi'alehua, and in this drawing, this illustration, this artwork, you'll see also kahuli. These are land shells. Hawaii had a couple hundred species of shells, snails, that one of their habitats was the Ohi'alehua. Unfortunately, these kahuli shells are extremely endangered today, and I think there's probably under 20 species left, and those populations are dipping. Some of these shells only have like 5 left. So it's an unfortunate history for them. Also, I should mention that the Ohi'alehua itself is threatened ecologically because of a disease called ROD, which stands for, ROD stands for rapid Ohia death. So it's such an important tree that our state doesn't really take very good care of, and unfortunately, it's susceptible to diseases. This tree, this other tree, the kukui tree, is not as threatened, as far as I know. It's a lot more. It's in a better place. This is the kukui tree. Again, if you have ever been to Hawaii, you've probably seen the nuts of this kukui tree, which I think are here. The nuts are often used in lei. And then there was one point where mainstream society, kukui nuts had become an accessory in, at least in American culture. And lots of people, particularly women, were wearing them as accessories, and they kind of became very, very popular. But ecologically speaking, the kukui has this Latin name. It has a nickname called the candlenut tree. The candlenut tree nickname comes from the fact that Hawaiians use the nuts as a torch. The nuts are burned and they hold the flame for several hours, and therefore they're good as a source of light. And the kukui tree itself, because of its size and strength, is an important presence, ecologically speaking, in the forest. You see the leaves here. These are young leaves. They grow very, very large, produce a lot of flowers, a lot of leaves, a lot of nuts, a lot of branches, and all of those things are used in material culture. The softwood of kukui is used for canoes. The sap and bark can be used for dyes. I should also add, not just dyes, but la'au lapa'au medicine, Hawaiian herbal medicine uses the sap. The sap can also be used to catch certain birds in the forest. This was in traditional times, not so much today anymore. The nuts are used for fishing. They're chewed to attract fish. As I mentioned earlier, they're used in lei making. And my favorite use of the kukui nut is in what we call inamona. Inamona is when you bake the leaves, the nuts, and add a couple of different condiments like pa'akai salt and a few other things, and mash it all up, and you get this sort of rough powder, coarse powder that you put on raw fish, such as poke. And that's, to me, the most important ingredient of poke that all of these people nowadays around the world are missing. Their poke recipes are missing inamona, which is, in my opinion, a very crucial, a critical ingredient. And that inamona comes from, the main ingredient is kukui nut. In our folklore and our mo'olelo, kukui is a kino lau, a physical manifestation or a physical body of kamapua'a. Kamapua'a is, in Hawaiian literature, the most famous jokester, the most famous rascal. Yeah, his name is Kamapua'a. And you can kind of see, there's a better picture on the next slide, but if you picture a boar's head with the snout here and some of the ears on the sides, the leaf itself of the kukui tree represents, it matches the form of a boar's head. Boars eat the nuts in the forest. The leaf, as I said, represents the snout and ears. And here we can kind of see a better picture of that. This is an artistic illustration of Kamapua'a himself. And you can kind of see how the leaf represents the shape of Kamapua'a's head and a boar's head. Kukui in Hawaiian language means lamp-like torch, like I mentioned earlier. That's why its nickname is the candle nut tree. And therefore, figuratively, it is representative of someone who is a leader or a guide for their people. It also means enlightenment and wisdom. The malu kukui, meaning the kukui shade, is to have questionable genealogy. If you're said to be in the kukui shade, you might not know your genealogy, your ancestors, their lines very clearly, which is a negative thing. So all of these linguistic permutations, I guess, the phrases, the different meanings, of course, are going to be very important in language documentation. The last species, a bird here that we call an iwa, represents another Hawaiian way of knowing. The iwa bird is a native shorebird. It actually is the only bird in Hawaii that we know of, that I know of, I should say, that is cannibalistic. The iwa bird eats other smaller birds. It forces them to disgorge their food, and then it eats it for himself or for itself. So sort of a predatory bird, high on the food chain. Materially, the iwa bird, its feathers are used as gifts because symbolically what the iwa represents. The iwa is famous for having the ability to glide instead of flap its wings to fly. It soars the highest. And so all of those things are symbolic for someone who is very lofty and deserving of its feathers. Sometimes their feathers are used in what we call kahili or leihulu, adornments for either the body or kahili would, in traditional times, were signs of royalty. Only ranking members of society could own them. The iwa are also navigational aids. They find islands quicker, much more easily and much more quickly than humans do. The motif, the shape of the iwa body is used frequently in kakau, uhi, tattoos, Hawaiian tattoos. And if the way the ohi alehua I mentioned earlier has a partnership with a certain variety of kalo, the iwa bird has a relationship to this fern called iwa, or sometimes iwa. Again, this duality that basically organizes the entire Hawaiian ecosystem. Iwa folklorically are symbolic of a very attractive person. Figuratively, they also denote thievery. Like I mentioned earlier, they steal other birds' food. Navigational value, of course, and they're the parent to a different type of shorebird called the koa'e. And koa'e is pictured here. We say in Olelo Hawaii, kikaha ka iwa I ka pali. The iwa bird soars above the cliff is a idiomatic way of saying what a beautiful person, what a handsome person. The iwa is also used to substitute in a playful way the number 9. In Hawaiian, we say iwa for 9 and this bird called the Iwa. They sound similar enough to switch back and forth. Because of the symbolism that the Iwa bird has, it became one of Kamehameha the first, King Kamehameha, the most important king in Hawaiian history. One of his epithets, one of his names was Ka'iwa Kilo Moku, which translates roughly to the Iwa bird that snatches up islands, or the Iwa bird that finds islands, because of the way Kamehameha succeeded at expanding his dominion. This is a picture of what we call pulo'ulo'u. And these two pulo'ulo'u roughly translate to, in English, kapu sticks, sticks that show things that are off limits, things they show something that is reserved for a certain class of people, probably ali'i, royal class, and therefore commoners would not be able to access that place or that resource, whatever is being blocked off by these pulo'ulo'u. And the reason I put these pulo'ulo'u, especially when they're crossed like that in an X shape, it shows something that is very kapu, something that is reserved or off limits. And I use this image to ask this question: should all knowledge be documented? You might be thinking there are forms of knowledge, examples of ways of knowing that are very kapu, that should be reserved for only certain people. So some forms of knowledge are sacred, and therefore they're not meant to be shared publicly, and that's completely okay. Communities can they can meet up and decide collectively which knowledge gets shared and with whom. And that's an important part of language documentation. So to sort of help us think about what kinds of knowledge forms and systems should be documented, and what kinds of, well, I should say, hopefully all knowledge can be documented at some point, but it's how we want to share it, which is a trickier question. How do we want to share it, and how do we want to pass it on? And to whom do we want to pass it on? So I want us to start thinking about what are some solutions to make sure that knowledge is passed on in appropriate ways. Earlier, I mentioned the word kuleana, and I said I would come back to it because kuleana is a very complicated and complex word. It has lots of shades, it has lots of dimensions, it has lots of meanings packed into a single word. This is a literal screenshot of the dictionary entry, what appears when we look up the word kuleana in the dictionary that most people use nowadays. Right, privilege, concern, responsibility, title, business property, and the list goes on and on. Kuleana is also a concept that Hawaii is, if you've been here, you might have even heard this word because it's very, very popular in local culture. It's invoked as a concept that keeps people accountable, that reminds people of their accountability, that reminds people of their responsibility to their communities, to their families, to their genealogies, to the land, to themselves, to each other. So it's sort of this reminder of morality and reminder of ethics in Hawaii. And I think it's a useful metaphor. It's a useful concept because, like I mentioned earlier, kuleana is complex because it's sort of a responsibility. But if you commit to that responsibility, then you end up being privileged by the opportunities that come from that commitment. And if you benefit from that commitment, then it means you have to be more responsible to that person or to that place or to that family or to that project. So kuleana is cyclical, meaning the more responsibility you have, the more privilege you might reap, the more benefits you might reap from that commitment. And the more benefits you reap means you have to continue that commitment. So if we're taking this concept, kuleana, I usually like to end this kind of session with a discussion. And I've seen lots of messages come in through the chat. So we'll have some time to talk about those. But I want to ask you folks, what is your kuleana to your language, to your culture, to your community? You could expand that to what is your kuleana to your land, your ancestral homeland? What is your kuleana to your genealogy? And then we should also be equally pensive and reflective about an outsider's kuleana. If there are people, individuals that are not necessarily from your community or your culture, and they're participating, they're helping document your language, what is their kuleana, if they have one, to your language, to your community, to your culture, to your land, etc. Let me see. And then going back to the main topic of today's session, what are some examples of different knowledge systems unique to your own community and culture that you might think this is important to document, and of course important to transmit to our children and their children and their children after that? I think already examples of different knowledge systems have been addressed and written about in the chat. And we want to make sure we're answering this question as well. How do we make sure to value all of these knowledge systems equally? You can fold into this question the other question earlier. How do we decide which knowledge gets shared with whom and how, to make sure we're protecting, appropriately protecting knowledge that is sacred? And here's my list of references. That went really quick, but I'm kind of glad, because now we can open it up to the chat and questions. And I'm actually peeking at the chat that's been so.
Yeah, the chat has been popping off, so I collected some questions for you, if that would be helpful.
Okay, good. And Anna, remind me, do we have sort of a stop time?
We have a soft stop time in 15 minutes, but in reality, feel free to stick around and answer questions as long as you want.
Soft time, soft in 15. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So
should I just pull some questions from the chat in the order they came in?
Sure, that sounds great.
So a factual question, is the kukui tree where the mountain Pu'ukukui gets its name?
Absolutely, yeah. Let me go back to that kukui. Pu'ukukui, I believe, well, kukui is the tree most closely associated with the island where my family comes from, called Molokai. Pu'ukukui, there is a Pu'ukukui at Molokai, I believe. And I would bet that the name of Pu'ukukui, which translates to Kukui Hill, or Hill of Kukui Trees, was named for this tree.
Awesome. I'm going to jump to just an easy, quick question. Can kukui nuts be used to produce or be mixed with other plants for medication?
I am certain they're used in certain remedies. I'm not a kahuna la'au lapa'au myself, so I'm not sure which ones, but for sure they have a medicinal value.
All right. Now to us.
When I give this, if Anna, you'll have me back in the future, I'm going to actually add that to one of the dimensions for which kukui is valuable medicinally. Yeah, because that's a really important.
Awesome. All right. A slightly more complicated question. Is Hawaiian generally highly, how do you, polysemic, polysemic? I don't ever say that word. And if so, could you compare it with English in that respect?
Ooh. Generally, it has lots of polysemy. See how I avoided the adjective. Hawaiian has lots of polysemy, but so does English too. So I'm not sure how I would compare and contrast. I probably wouldn't say Hawaiian is more polysemic than English. Probably just differently. Different words in English have lots of meaning, and different words in Hawaiian have lots of meanings too. I know that's kind of a underwhelming answer, but
It's a tough one.
have more about yeah.
All right.
If I have more insight, I can share it later on.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of an English word like shot. It has a million meanings. There's a lot of polysemy in most languages.
I was thinking of get. Get in English is so hard to teach to a second language learner of English, and the same concept isn't. To teach that kind of Hawaiian words that estimate the meaning of get in English are not as difficult to teach. So polysemy, cross-linguistic polysemy is just different, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, here's a very complex question. How would you determine your position to your culture or community? Or put another way, how would you define how much of it is really yours? Because determining my own position would definitely have ramifications for determining my own kuleana.
Can you read that last part? Because determining.
So the question asker says, determining my own position would have ramifications for determining my kuleana.
Sure, and that sort of self-reflection is an important part of the process. We should all be sort of aware of how we fit into the community we're representing, or we think we're representing, and hopefully you actually indeed do represent that community because you're a part of the community. I can only speak on the behalf of the Hawaiian community. When it comes to membership in the Hawaiian community, it usually is by ethnicity, genealogy, but not always. Our most illustrious Hawaiian scholar, named Mary Kawena Pukui, she wrote several dictionaries. She wrote keystone texts on Hawaii for the discipline of Hawaiian studies. She had a Hanai daughter, an adopted daughter. She adopted her daughter who was 100% Japanese, but transmitted all of her knowledge to her as her daughter. And I can't see anyone saying, oh, the daughter is not part of the Hawaiian community. So the criteria sometimes get blurry, and that's okay. The criteria of membership to a certain community. I think it's always up to the community to decide those criteria. And hopefully those criteria help somebody who wants to contribute to whether it's language documentation or cultural revitalization or preservation of that community. Hopefully those criteria can help clarify what an individual's kuleana is, because it's certainly, that's a good point. I can't think of a community that wants to well, I'll just speak on behalf of Hawaiian. Hawaiian language has benefited from the help of outsiders, even linguists, particularly linguists in language revitalization. And even though they're ethnically not part of the Hawaiian community, they're part of the Hawaiian community as, you know, in a different way because of their contributions. So, yeah, community is hard to define, and the boundaries are porous. That's okay. You can sort of expect that. As long as there's community sort of agreement and consent. Hopefully that answered your question. And Anna, I think you left a resource about the insider-outsider dynamic, which is, yeah, nuanced and complicated.
Yeah, thank you, Ha'a. And I think also for anybody who's interested in talking through those dynamics, two of the ELP mentors would be really good to talk to, Alexandra Philbin and Danica Vickers. They're from different contexts, but they both do a lot of work around sort of language and identity and belonging and all that stuff. So feel free to make an appointment. And then we also have, someone has prefaced this, that this is a complicated question, all right? So you mentioned that we need to document the knowledge that's relevant for a specific community, but I struggle with identifying what this might be. So I try to ask myself how this would apply to a big language like Spanish. If I wanted to document Spanish, what kind of knowledge would be relevant? Isn't the fact that we keep considering minority languages only or mostly in these restricted contexts of traditional knowledge counterproductive for documentation? Very complicated question.
Yeah, isn't the fact that we keep considering minority only most of the most I'm not Federico. I would like, if you're still here, maybe you can elaborate on why you.
I am, yes.
Can you say more about what you mean about counterproductive for documentation if we're limiting it only to, if I understand, when we limit.
Let me turn on my camera because otherwise it's just weird. Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I just don't want to go too much into detail into things that I work with because this is like a large group and I don't want to bore anyone with this. But I work particularly with speakers of Quechua in Argentina. And Quechua has been, in Argentina particularly, has been always considered in the context of traditional stories and like this kind of traditional knowledge, which is documented, and I agree that this is relevant. But I noticed that many speakers also have this um, curiosity what it would be like to speak about politics in their language, because that's not something they've usually done. But it's not like they don't have the interest to do this. They have just not been enabled to do this. So if I, as an outsider who's working with them, I speak the language and I speak with them about these things, and when they start talking with me about everyday life, everyday things that are not just like for the thousandth time, the story of a fox with a turtle, they become excited to talk about like other things, like how was it when I had to request, I don't know, when I retired and I did some paperwork at the government's office, for example. So I was thinking, like, at what point can we go beyond this traditional knowledge, and how can I identify if it's not my influence that it's actually making them consider other uses for the languages?
Okay, I understand that question. And that's a good question. I think the push to value or revalue traditional ethnological knowledge, as I understand it, is a response to a sustained period of time when it was ignored. So doesn't mean language documentation isn't, when we say make sure we're paying attention to TEK, I don't think in my head means ignore other registers of language or genres of language use, but just means make sure we're paying attention to TEK as well. That kind of would be my answer, because yeah, it's when speakers of a language talk about politics, which is one of the we know in second language learning that those kinds of abstract things, abstract topics such as politics and religion and those very sort of sophisticated conversations, those are sort of the first to erode from the language when the language is under threat and losing speakers and shifting to another language, and the last to be remastered when the language is being revitalized. So of course, those topics and those registers, those domains of language are important for documentation. But to add to the list of important topics, TEK is also one of them. Anna, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that was beautifully put. And also, if folks want to talk more with you about these issues later on, are you open to sharing your email or other contact info?
Sure thing, sure thing. But thank you for that question, Federico. It's
Thank you. That was very
very
useful.
thought-provoking. Here's my email.
Brilliant. I think we have time for a couple more questions. This one might need some clarification. For context and comparison from one language to another, would endonyms and exonyms be a useful category to look into?
Heck yes, absolutely. And that's such a favorite topic of mine. I apologize I didn't list that on this this slide. Exonyms and endonyms. Yeah, as many endonyms particularly as possible. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to throw in an easy question. What actually are the softwoods of a kukui tree, and how do they make canoes?
We have what we would call what is it called? Wa'apa'ani, I want to say. Sometimes just like children's canoes. They wouldn't be used for long distance voyaging. They wouldn't be used for even inter-island voyaging, but mostly like as a toy almost. Because it's not technically a hardwood. I'm not sure what the criteria of a wood being counted as hard or soft. I'm not sure, but these wouldn't be sort of industry grade canoes.
All right. Let's wrap it up on a difficult question. So you emphasize that a language carries a worldview. We often talk about TEK as if it were a rich but largely fixed body of inherited knowledge. I'm not sure that's accurate. Can we argue that a language like Hawaiian, precisely because it encodes a particular worldview, is also capable of generating new knowledge and suggesting novel ways to address contemporary challenges, including in modern urban societies? In other words, does revitalization not only open a window onto the past, but also a distinct epistemic toolkit for imagining different futures?
Wow. That is a spectacular question. And something I haven't really thought about. I think TEK it has the tendency of being historical and looking into the past, but doesn't exclude futurity and a gaze into the future, and like you said, an epistemic toolkit for imagining different futures. There's a Hawaiian proverb that we have, "Ikawa mamu akawa mahope." The future is informed by the past. That's a very rough translation of that, and sort of one interpretation. You could also interpret it as the past, it interprets the future or reflects the future. There's a lot of different ways. The essence of this proverb is basically saying that the past should be informing our way forward. So I think that's kind of a beautiful answer, a poetic answer to this question. While we are in the process of TEK, in the campaign of documenting TEK, we are sort of always looking backward. But if we remember that the past informs the future, because the past has gotten us to the present moment so far, then it has wisdom and knowledge to carry us forward. But I'm going to think about this question a lot. Anna, can we save this chat somehow? We can, right?
Yes, definitely.
And I like the idea of introducing TEK and sort of less fixed to the past paradigms, I guess. And thinking about reframing TEK as what it can offer the future as well. Imagining different futures. That's beautiful.
And I hope it's okay if I throw out one more suggestion for the mentors program. One of our mentors, Yasmin Novello, is doing a lot of work around this concept of cosmovisions, which I think is more used in sort of a Central American context, but it's essentially a worldview that encapsulates all ways of understanding and knowing about the universe and existence and how things are done and how things exist. And she also works a lot in strategic visioning and planning. So how to take that way of understanding the world that's inherent in Mayan knowledge and use it to plan different futures. So I think that speaks pretty directly to your question. And Yasmin would be a wonderful person to talk about that with if you're interested.
Absolutely, for sure. These are great questions and insights.
I think I don't see any other questions. We've got an interesting comment about language standardization.
Yeah.
But if anybody else has any additional questions, last call. All right, just seeing lots of words of appreciation, which I very much echo. Thank you so much, Ha'a. This is always such a wonderful session. Thank you for being back with us this year. And thanks everybody for being here to learn today and to talk with each other and share all of your different knowledge. So next week, we will be getting back to something pretty hands-on and practical, right? We're just sort of diving from the really big picture to more practical, small picture over and over. And we'll be learning about using a program called Elan to transcribe recordings and make subtitles for language materials that you might create. So see you next week at this same time. I don't think there's any more time zone changes ahead of us. So whatever time it is where you are, that'll be the time. And let's have a big, big round of applause for Ha'a. Mahalo. This was amazing.
I look forward to this every year. Really.
I think we all do. All right. Thank you, Ha'a. Thank you, everybody. We will see you next week.
Mahalo,
Take care,
everyone.
folks.
Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye-bye.